All right, the learner. Buckle up because we're diving deep today. Deep into the world of Evan Spiegel and the absolutely wild ride that is Snapchat.
Yeah, you sent this one our way, his interview on the Diary of a CEO. And you know us, we're all about pulling out those golden nuggets, the entrepreneurial lessons, those innovation pivots, the leadership stuff, all of it.
From those early days, coding away in a Stanford dorm room to going toe-to-toe with the giants of social media. And of course, that whole thanks but no thanks to Zuckerberg's $3 billion offer.
Yeah, we're getting into that.
Okay.
But first, we've got to lay the groundwork. We're digging into a YouTube transcript where Spiegel himself breaks down how Snapchat came to be, the crucial choices he made, and the wisdom he picked up along the way.
And you know what's fascinating is how his story starts. That early contrarian streak, the math program expose, remember?
Oh yeah, I gotta love that. And then those formative experiences at Stanford, product design, that class, entrepreneurship and venture capital, where the focus was all about those massive change the world opportunities.
Absolutely. And speaking of opportunities, we can't skip over that first venture, Future Freshman. It didn't quite take off, but man, the lessons he learned from that.
Oh yeah, huge lessons there. The whole love what you build mantra and getting feedback, like yesterday.
And then that almost accidental moment that gave birth to the whole disappearing photo concept. Plus, we're going to unearth those little gems. The early name Peekaboo and how people reacted to those first screenshots, the whole 9 yards.
Right, and we can't forget about Snapchat's meteoric rise. That first venture capital injection, $485,000, valuing them at $4.25 million.
Talk about an early vote of confidence.
Seriously. And then those early hurdles they had to jump, those moments where it could all gone south. Like, remember when their infrastructure crashed for 3 whole days?
Oh yeah, that was a nail biter. But then how their growth just exploded, totally organic, friends telling friends, and that initial focus on speed and that super slick camera interface, that was key.
For sure. Okay, so diving right in. Spiegel really hammers this point home. You got to love what you build. It's not just some fluffy feel-good thing. He makes it clear it's absolutely vital if you're going to make it through the inevitable storms that come with building a business.
Totally. And he even specifically contrasts Future Freshman with Snapchat, highlighting that the passion for the latter, that was the game changer. What do you think about that? How does that passion actually translate into, tangible success?
It's fascinating. There's this undeniable connection between that deep internal drive and being able to keep going when things get tough. With Future Freshman, neither he nor his co-founder were the target users, right?
Right.
So that connection, that inherent drive, it just wasn't there. And if you don't truly believe in what you're creating, it's so much harder to push through those inevitable setbacks, the long nights, the self-doubt. That passion fuels your resilience, plain and simple.
It's like that extra tank of gas when you hit those inevitable roadblocks.
Exactly. And, that stumble with Future Freshmen seems to have directly led to another crucial takeaway, speedy feedback.
Yeah.
They poured a ton of time into building this whole polished website before even getting any real user input.
Right. They went all in before they even knew if anyone wanted it.
Exactly. And that really drove home the need for a much faster cycle. Launch, listen, iterate, repeat. With Snapchat, they threw a basic version out there, and then they were glued to how people actually used it.
And that shift from disappearing messages with Peekaboo to focusing on disappearing photos and then adding those captions, the drawing tools, that all came from those early conversations with their friends who were actually using it.
It's textbook product development, right? Get that MVP out there, that minimum viable product, quick and dirty, and then constantly refine it based on what's actually happening in the real world. It's all about de-risking those assumptions early and building something people actually want, instead of pouring resources into some grand vision that might totally miss the mark. Their initial idea, it wasn't perfect, but their willingness to listen and adapt based on those early signals, that was key.
And another thing that stands out is that think big mentality. Spiegel really credits the whole Stanford business culture, especially that entrepreneurship and venture capital class, with instilling that in him. It wasn't just about creating a viable business. It was about tackling opportunities with the potential to reach billions. He even used that analogy, coffee shop versus tech platform, to illustrate the difference in reach.
Oh, totally. And it's such an important point, especially in the tech world. Unlike traditional brick-and-mortar businesses with those physical limitations, digital products, they have this inherent ability to scale. Once you build that core infrastructure, reaching millions, even billions of users doesn't require this proportional increase in cost.
Right. It's not like opening 1,000 new coffee shops.
Exactly. And it's this potential for exponential growth that attracts those big investments and fuels that drive to pursue those truly world-changing ideas. That think big mentality, it just aligns perfectly with the nature of technology.
Absolutely. And speaking of reaching a global audience, Spiegel had this really interesting take on international growth. Instead of aggressively pushing into new markets, Snapchat's strategy was more about following the organic adoption they were seeing.
Oh, interesting. So kind of letting the users lead the way. Yeah.
Exactly. They'd identify countries where people were already gravitating toward the platform, and then they'd focus on localizing and building on that momentum. He contrasted this with the more traditional approach, where companies often prioritize their home market first. What do you think about that follow the user approach? What are the pros and cons there?
Well, it's definitely efficient, right? You're putting your resources where you already know there's demand,
Hmm.
less risk of those expensive expansion efforts that just fizzle out.
Right, you're not throwing darts blindly at a map.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it also allows you to really tailor your product and marketing to those specific early adopting markets. But there's a flip side.
Oh, for sure.
You might miss out on shaping a market proactively or building a strong presence in areas that could become major players down the line. It's more reactive, for sure. But in their case, it seems to have worked out pretty well.
Let's circle back to future freshmen for a sec. Spiegel was pretty open about why they decided to pull the plug. We talked about the lack of passion, but he also brought up a significant distribution disadvantage. They were targeting those college-bound students, but the established players already had those strong relationships with high school counselors. That's a pretty big barrier to entry.
Yeah, it's a classic example of a brilliant idea that hits a wall because they couldn't get it into the hands of the people they were trying to reach. Future Freshman highlights just how important distribution is. You can have the best product in the world, but if you can't effectively get it to your target audience, game over.
Right, you got to think about those gatekeepers, those established channels.
Exactly. And you have to come up with a viable strategy to reach your customers, whether it's through partnerships, creative marketing, or building your own network. Recognizing those potential roadblocks early on is crucial.
It's like planning your route before you hit the road.
Exactly. Makes a huge difference. And what's also super interesting is that even the core concept of Snapchat, it wasn't set in stone from day one.
It evolved, right.
It totally did. That initial focus on disappearing messages under the name Peekaboo, it just didn't click the same way as those disappearing photos.
Yeah.
That shift, it came directly from observing how those early users were actually engaging with the app.
It's a great reminder you can have your vision, but sometimes you've got to let go and adapt.
Absolutely. It underscores how important it is to be adaptable and truly user-centric. You need a core vision, no doubt. But being too rigid, it can blind you to those valuable insights and how users are actually behaving. That willingness to pivot, to refine your concept based on what you see happening, that's a hallmark of successful innovation. It's finding that sweet spot between having a guiding star and being agile enough to navigate the terrain as you go.
And they were clearly super attuned to user feedback. But Spiegel also made it clear that not all feedback is created equal. And maybe even more importantly, how you implement that feedback is just as crucial as the feedback itself.
Oh, for sure.
He used the example of their caption tool, explaining how they designed it for speed and ease of use. They didn't just slap on a standard clunky caption feature.
Yeah, I can see that. It makes total sense. So how do you sift through all that noise of user feedback and figure out what to actually implement? And then, how do you do it right?
It's a skill, right?
It is. It's understanding your core user, that product vision you have, and your technical limitations. You have to look for those patterns in the feedback, prioritize their requests that align with your big picture goals, and then get creative about how to weave those changes in seamlessly so they feel intuitive for the user. It's not just about adding features for the sake of it. It's about enhancing that overall user experience. And Snapchat's caption tool, that's a great example of thoughtful design driven by user needs.
Now, let's talk about those early investors. Can you imagine their skepticism? I mean, you've got these established tech giants and then this new app built on photos that disappear. They must have thought it was just a fad.
Oh, absolutely. And Spiegel even mentioned how they were worried about exactly that, the competition and whether Snapchat would just fizzle out. He said having a full year of user data showing consistent engagement, that was the turning point. It convinced them. What do you think about the power of data, especially in those early uncertain days? Data in those early days, it's like gold, especially when you don't have that long track record or a big name behind you. Having hard evidence of how people are actually using your product, how often, for how long, how it's growing, it validates your entire business model.
Right. It shuts down those doubts.
It does. It proves there's real demand, sustained interest. And that, let me tell you, that's way more convincing to investors than just a slick presentation. For
Yeah.
Snapchat, that year of data, it was like social proof that they were here to stay.
All right, now the moment everyone's been waiting for. We got to talk about that $3 billion offer from Zuckerberg. I mean, to turn that down at 23, that's legendary.
Yeah, it's a bold move.
Bold is an understatement. Spiegel said it came down to this deep love for what they were building and this unwavering belief that Snapchat had an even bigger future, especially considering he and his co-founder had already each sold $10 million worth of stock. They weren't hurting financially.
Right, they had that safety net.
Yeah.
So what does that decision tell us about their conviction, their long-term vision?
It's massive. To walk away from that kind of money, you got to have extraordinary belief in yourself and the value of what you're creating. That financial security they already had, it probably gave them the confidence to bet on themselves, on their vision, rather than taking that instant payout. It's a testament to their ambition and how deeply connected they felt to Snapchat. They weren't just building an app, they were building something they truly believed in.
And speaking of building, let's shift gears for a minute and talk about the team. Spiegel was pretty candid about those early hiring decisions and what they learned. He mentioned how, at first, they really overvalued leadership experience at scale.
Right, which makes sense. They were scaling up fast.
Yeah. But he said it sometimes meant missing out on individuals who were more adaptable, who brought fresh perspectives. They eventually distilled their core values down to kind, smart, and creative. And even their understanding of those evolved over time, especially the whole kind is clear concept.
Interesting. And he also highlighted the importance of having T-shaped individuals on their team. For the learner out there, can you quickly break down what a T-shaped person is and why that approach to hiring might be beneficial?
Absolutely. So a T-shaped person is someone who's got deep expertise in one specific area, that's the vertical line of the T, but also a broad understanding and ability to work across different disciplines. That's the horizontal line.
Got it. So they're not just siloed in their specialty.
Right. And in a fast-growing company like Snapchat was back then, having team members who not only rock their own roles, but can also understand and contribute to other areas, it just makes everything flow better. Better communication, problem solving, agility. It's like having specialists who can also see the big picture.
I like that. Now, imagine young Evan Spiegel leading that small, scrappy team. If he could go back and give himself one piece of leadership advice, he said it would be this: everything's going to be okay.
That's simple but powerful.
Right. He felt they sometimes got bogged down trying to make the absolute perfect decision instead of focusing on being able to adjust quickly if they messed up. He stressed how important it is to make decisions fast, be ready to pivot, and not get paralyzed by fear of making mistakes. What do you think about that kind of decisiveness, especially for a startup?
In the startup world, speed is everything. It's often what gives you an edge. The ability to make decisions quickly, even if they're not perfect, allows you to move faster, learn faster, and grab opportunities before they disappear. The cost of indecision, it can be way worse than a small misstep.
Right, especially if you have a culture where it's okay to make mistakes and learn from them.
Exactly. It's about action, agility, overthinking everything to death.
Love it. He also talked about how they should have been way more intentional about defining and embedding their company culture from the get-go. That whole kind, smart, creative ethos. As they grew rapidly, they basically absorbed all these different cultural norms from the bigger companies their new hires came from.
Oh, that makes sense. It's like their culture got diluted.
Yeah, and he felt they were too slow to bake their own values into their hiring, promotion, and performance evaluations, to the point where he felt they were losing that initial culture they'd envisioned. He also mentioned his co-founder Bobby's strong stance against that whole brilliant jerk concept. Why is it so crucial to be proactive about building a company culture, especially when you're growing that fast?
Think of culture as the operating system of a company. It dictates how people act, make decisions, interact with each other, and even how they treat customers. Early on, it often develops organically, but when you start scaling up, you got to get intentional about defining and reinforcing those core values. Otherwise, you risk watering down your original culture or accidentally creating one that doesn't reflect your vision at all. And baking those values into your HR processes, that ensures you're hiring, rewarding, and promoting people who embody the culture you want. And Bobby's point about those brilliant jerks, it just highlights how important it is to ensure that brilliance goes hand in hand with positive values.
It's not just about talent, it's about fit.
Exactly. Now, what about bad advice? What sticks out to you there?
Well, Spiegel remembered all this early pressure to sell the company, especially because of the fierce competition and the whole idea that Snapchat was just a fleeting trend. He even overheard their lawyers discussing the possibility of the company going bust. He felt that advice completely missed their long-term vision and the groundbreaking products they were developing.
It's tough, right? You're trying to build something new, and everyone's telling you to cash out.
It's a good lesson, though, about staying true to your own convictions.
It really is. Early-stage companies are constantly bombarded with opinions and advice, often well-intentioned. But in the end, the founders, they had to have that unshakable belief in their vision, that resilience to keep going even when everyone else doubts them. And those who told them to sell, they just couldn't see the bigger picture. It highlights the importance of having that clear, compelling, long-term strategy that guides your decisions, even when you're facing skepticism.
You have to trust your gut. And of course, we have to talk about the elephant in the room getting copied, specifically Instagram stories.
Ah, yes, the copycat dilemma.
It caused some concern at first, but they eventually realized that people were using the two platforms for different things. Snapchat was more for those closer, more intimate connections. Now, Spiegel almost views copying as a validation of sorts.
Interesting perspective.
Right. And he emphasizes the importance of building platforms, not just features. Their augmented reality platform, Lens Studio, is a perfect example. And he briefly touched on their proactive stance on removing adult content, which, aligns with their values. So how do you stay ahead when competitors inevitably try to replicate your success?
Honestly, in tech, imitation is practically guaranteed. Staying ahead isn't always about preventing copying, that's often impossible. It's about constant innovation and creating these deeper, more complex ecosystems that are harder to duplicate.
Right, so you're not just building a single product, you're building a whole world.
Exactly. And look at Lens Studio. It's a strategic move beyond just ephemeral messaging. They're creating a platform for creativity, for augmented reality experiences that's much harder to copy. And their proactive stance on content that reinforces their brand, their values. It's another way to stand out.
It's about building a brand that people trust and identify with.
Exactly. Now, Spiegel also touched on some broader issues that are really relevant to the tech world today. On the topic of politics, he was pretty neutral, just observing the different approaches to content moderation taken by the big platforms.
Right, he didn't take sides, just laid out the different approaches.
Which makes sense. These are complex issues with no easy answers. He also talked about social media and kids. His own 14-year-old uses Snapchat, YouTube, Roblox, all the usual suspects. It reflects this ongoing conversation about the impact of these platforms on younger users, something we're all grappling with.
Yeah, definitely a topic that's not going away anytime soon. And he briefly mentioned the whole US-China tech relations situation, highlighting how it's unclear where collaboration ends and competition begins. These are all pretty massive and ever-changing challenges for any tech company, especially the big players.
For sure. It's content moderation, the impact of social media on kids, the geopolitical landscape. All these issues are intertwined, and they're all constantly evolving. It's a lot to navigate.
And it's not getting any simpler. Now, let's talk about Spiegel's personal reflections on leading a public company. He admitted it was way more challenging than he expected. He really emphasized the importance of focus, even having to shut down successful projects like those mini games because they weren't core to their mission.
Yeah, it's going to be tough making those kinds of calls.
It shows a real commitment to staying on track. And when it came to those emerging technologies like AI and AR, he stressed balancing intuition with user feedback. He also shared a pretty frustrating experience with Luxottica, who seemed to copy their spectacles innovation after initial partnership talks. Talk about a punch in the gut.
Yeah, that's rough. Looking ahead, he sees AI as a game changer, especially in education. And he describes Snapchat's current phase as coming out of a rough patch, calling it an early spring, with lots of growth in creator content.
It's a good reminder that even for the most successful companies, there are always ups and downs, and that leadership is about navigating those constantly changing tides.
It absolutely is. It's about knowing when to trust your gut, when to rely on data, when to pivot, when to stay the course. And it's about constantly evolving as a leader, adapting to new challenges and opportunities.
Spiegel also talked about this really unique practice at Snap called Council, which is actually rooted in his school days. It's a structured way for small groups to communicate openly, speaking and listening from the heart with spontaneity. They use it to connect and gather different viewpoints, like when they were thinking about moving the company to the Bay Area.
That's interesting. So it's not just about top-down decision-making. There's this element of collective wisdom.
Exactly. But while he clearly values team input, Spiegel stressed that the final call, the responsibility for making those tough decisions, that ultimately rests with the CEO. And he also mentioned Snapchat's current policy of requiring more than 4 days a week in the office.
That seems to be a trend these days, companies wanting people back in the office at least part-time.
Yeah, it's that whole balance between flexibility and the benefits of in-person collaboration. But what do you think about that council practice? How does it fit into a tech company, and how do you balance that with strong leadership?
It's a really interesting model. It can be so valuable for open communication, building trust, tapping into the collective intelligence of the team. It creates a space for diverse perspectives, which often leads to better decisions and a stronger sense of ownership. But there has to be a balance. You need that input, but effective leadership also requires the ability to synthesize that information and make decisions when they need to be made. And Spiegel, recognizing that the CEO ultimately holds the responsibility, that shows he gets that balance.
It's about listening, but also leading. Now, when asked about the fundamental principles of success for any entrepreneur, Spiegel kept coming back to one thing: caring deeply about the business, the team, the customers.
That's powerful.
Right. He truly believes that deep passion and dedication are what set people apart. And he even shared that he personally doesn't find work inherently stressful and emphasized celebrating those team wins, something he admits he needs to do more of. But he was also really honest about the tough parts, saying the hardest days are those involving difficult decisions like layoffs. It really highlights the human side of building a company.
It really does. It's
Mm.
so easy to get caught up in the technology, the bottom line, all of that. But in the end, it's about people.
Mm.
And genuinely caring about your product, your team, your customers, that creates a different kind of energy.
It's about purpose, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it leads to better products, a better experience for everyone involved.
Yeah.
And his reflections on stress and celebrating wins, it just reinforces the importance of a balanced, emotionally intelligent approach to leadership.
And one more thing that really resonated with me: Spiegel reframed the whole idea of imposter syndrome. He actually sees that feeling of having more to learn as something positive, a driver for growth.
Yeah, I like that. It's a shift in perspective.
Looking ahead, he wants to give back, but is adamant about not starting another tech company. He's been there, done that. He felt the hardest thing he's had to overcome is the constant personal evolution required to meet the changing demands of the business and his family. And developing that self-awareness as a leader, especially as Snapchat grew, it meant actively seeking out different perspectives, connecting with people at all levels of the company.
He sounds like a leader who's really committed to growth, both personally and professionally.
Totally. He even admitted to being impatient, always wanting to move fast and learn more, and tries to adapt his leadership style to bring out the best in each team member. He champions creativity in every role and acknowledges that his team members often have deeper expertise than him in specific areas. He even talked about the unexpected advantage of being a young, naive founder, using that lack of knowledge as an opportunity to learn from others.
That's a lot of self-reflection. But it's so valuable. It shows a real commitment to personal growth, which, let's be honest, is essential for any leader, especially in a field that's constantly changing. His reframing of imposter syndrome, that's a gem, turning a potential negative into fuel for growth. And his honesty about his own areas for improvement, that's powerful. It provides real insight for anyone in a leadership position or aspiring to be. And the thing about naivete, sometimes that fresh perspective, it can be a huge advantage. It allows you to ask those dumb questions, the ones that nobody else dares to ask, and that can lead to breakthroughs.
And with that, Evan's parting thought: the most crucial question he believes any entrepreneur should ask themselves is this: do you love what you are doing?
So The Learner, there you have it, a deep dive into the mind of Evan Spiegel. We've covered a ton. The birth of an idea, navigating those crazy waters of massive growth and fierce competition, the importance of passion and adaptability. Hopefully you've gleaned some valuable insights, maybe even had a few aha moments about what it really takes to build something extraordinary.
And one final thought to chew on: Spiegel's journey shows that delicate dance between staying true to your vision and being open to radical change based on feedback and how the world is actually reacting to your product. How can you apply that in your own life, in your own learning, in your own projects? What seemingly set-in-stone ideas or approaches might be worth revisiting, given new information or experiences?
It's about having that core belief, that drive, but also being willing to let go and adapt. Thanks for sending this interview our way. It's been a fascinating exploration. We encourage you to keep digging into Snapchat's story, maybe even check out the full conversation yourself. Until our next deep dive, stay curious, keep learning, and keep pushing those boundaries.
And remember, The learner, every challenge is a learning opportunity. And who knows, maybe you'll be the next Evan Spiegel, inspiring us with your own incredible journey. Until next time.